Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, talking about the difference between weather and climate. In 2005, NASA explained this on their website. They said the difference between weather and climate is a measure of time. Weather is what conditions of the atmosphere are over a short period of time, and climate is how the atmosphere behaves over relatively long periods of time. When we talk about climate change, we talk about changes in long-term averages of daily weather. Today, children always hear stories from their parents and grandparents about how snow was always piled up to their waists as they trudged off to school. Children today in most areas of the country haven't experienced those kinds of dreadful snow-packed winters. The change in recent winter snows indicate that the climate has changed since their parents were young. If summers seem hotter lately, then the recent climate may have changed. So in the year 2005, NASA said that global warming is causing winters to be less snowy and less severe. This is an interesting concept because 5 of New York's 10 largest snowstorms have occurred since the year 2005. New York's second largest snowstorm occurred in the following year in 2006, and the largest one occurred 10 years later in 2016. So climate alarmists have changed their tune, and now they say that global warming causes cold, snowy winters. And 16 years ago, they said that we don't get cold, snowy winters anymore because of global warming. So if we don't get cold, snowy winters, that's because of global warming. And if we do get cold, snowy winters, that's also because of global warming. So no matter what the weather is, it's because of global warming. But I have to wonder what caused the cold, snowy winters of the past before we had global warming. NASA also said that summers seem hotter lately, and that's because of global warming. But the actual U.S. temperature data shows that summers have been getting cooler, with recent summers among the coolest on record. The frequency of hot days in the United States has plummeted over the last 90 years. Summers used to be much hotter in the United States, particularly during the 1930s and the 1950s. NASA knows that the United States has cooled since the 1930s. This was their U.S. temperature graph, which they published in 1999. But reality didn't suit NASA's global warming agenda, so they altered the data. They now show a lot of warming from the 1930s through the end of the 20th century, but in 1999 they showed a lot of cooling during the same period. When I show these graphs, I frequently get accused by climate alarmists of conspiracy theory, but both of these graphs were taken right off the NASA website. NASA said if summers seem hotter lately, then the recent climate may have changed, but the only thing that's actually changed is their own temperature graphs. What's getting hotter recently is the level of misinformation and climate propaganda coming out of government agencies. Now let's go back and look at some actual history from the year 1890. The first week in May of 1890, there were huge fires burning all over Minnesota and Wisconsin. It's not difficult to imagine the climate hysteria which would occur now if we had a repeat of the weather of early May 1890. Now let's go to the end of June in 1890. There were massive forest fires burning all over northern New Mexico. Superb forests of pine were being destroyed, including one on the east slope of the Jemez Mountains. This is of particular interest to me because I grew up there and because we just had our wedding ceremony there last weekend. The fires of June 1890 burned up and down the western slopes of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. And as a result of those fires, that burn area now has some of the largest and most spectacular aspen groves in the world. This picture was taken north of Santa Fe, near where I worked as a wilderness ranger for the U.S. Forest Service 40 years ago. These spectacular forests are there because of massive fires which occurred 130 years ago, back when carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were well below 300 parts per million. 10 years ago, the east slope of the Jemez Mountains experienced another very large forest fire called the Las Conchas Fire. The press reported at the time that the Las Conchas Fire in New Mexico burned the Pajarito Ski Resort, where I learned to ski. I learned to ski there, and so did well-known professional skier Dean Cummings. We were up there at the ski area on Sunday, and it didn't look like it was destroyed to me. The ski area is actually in pretty good shape, other than the fact that the governor of New Mexico wouldn't let them operate because of some virus. And the burn areas from 2011 are filling in with luxuriant aspen and locust forest. The east slope of the Jemez Mountains have never looked better during my lifetime than they do now. I took this picture last Sunday of Kyrie and Kyrie adjacent to the Pajarito Mountain ski area. The ski area is fine, but unfortunately skier Dean Cummings isn't doing quite as well. He's in jail awaiting trial for murder. Just one more notorious Los Alamos High School graduate. Now let's look at what New Mexico climate is really all about. This graph shows wet periods and dry periods in New Mexico over the last 2,500 years. The climate is constantly swinging back and forth between wet periods and dry periods, and has been doing that for as long as tree ring data is available. My parents moved to New Mexico right at the end of the 1950s drought and right at the beginning of this wet period. Even though they saw the terribly dry conditions in New Mexico at the end of 1956, they believed that the wet period over the next 3 decades was the normal climate. They believe that New Mexico is normally wet and that the dry years we've had since then are abnormal and are caused by global warming. But the reality is that New Mexico is dry more of the time than it's wet, and that the recent dry period has nothing to do with carbon dioxide, has nothing to do with global warming, and it has nothing to do with climate change. It's just the normal cyclical climate of New Mexico. Lots of people moved to Santa Fe during the wet period of the 1980s, and they assume that's the normal climate, and in their minds the dry period which New Mexico has experienced recently is due to global warming and climate change. They believe this sort of nonsense from NASA that you can evaluate climate over a 30-year period. But the reality is that in order to understand climate, you have to look at weather patterns over hundreds or thousands of years. 2 years ago, there was a huge fire on La Veta Pass west of Walsenburg, Colorado. People were certain that it was the end of the world and it was due to global warming. But this is what it looked like there yesterday. The forest floor is filling in with verdant aspen forest. The weather is cyclical, the climate is cyclical, and forest growth is cyclical as well. Twitter doesn't like it when I post pictures like this. They call it sensitive content. Here's a couple of pictures which I posted a couple of hours ago. Twitter said, "The following media includes potentially sensitive content." And these are the 2 pictures which Twitter censored. The pictures show Kyrie holding the latest member of our climate team, Caesar. As you can see, Caesar is going to be a formidable foe to climate alarmists. Thanks for watching, and please join Toto, Kyrie, and Caesar on the web at realclimatescience.com.